The cardboard box in my arms was tearing at the corners, filled with the very last remnants of my 26 years in that miserable house. Sweat stung my eyes as I navigated the front steps of my childhood home in Naperville, Illinois. It was the middle of a sweltering, unforgiving July afternoon, the kind of day where the humidity makes it hard to even draw a breath. My arms were shaking violently from exhaustion, my fingers slipping against the cheap packing tape. But I did not get any help. I did not get a held door or a sympathetic glance. Instead, as I stumbled down the long, concrete driveway, my older sister Sloane stepped out onto the front porch. She did not open the door for me. She did not offer to carry a single lamp, a stray book, or even hold the gate. She simply raised her phone, adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses, and waited deliberately until I looked my absolute worst. Click. She took the picture before I had even reached the bumper of my rented moving van. I heard the artificial camera shutter sound, a tiny, sharp noise that seemed to echo menacingly in the quiet, perfectly manicured suburban street. Before I had even managed to slide the heavy, awkwardly shaped box into the trunk of the van, my phone buzzed in my back pocket. Then it buzzed again. And again. A rapid, relentless vibration. I pulled it out, my fingers dusty and trembling from the heavy lifting, and opened the notification on my lock screen. Sloane had posted the photo to her Facebook page, making absolutely sure to tag every single extended family member we had. The caption read, "The freeloader is out." I stood there, frozen on the hot asphalt of the driveway, watching the numbers climb with terrifying speed. Within 10 minutes, 160 relatives had hit the like button. 160 people who had known me since I was a baby. The little thumbs-up icons and laughing faces rained down on my screen like stones being thrown at my chest. Then came the comments, hitting harder than the likes. My mother, Cora, the woman who had carried me for 9 months and who was supposed to be my safe harbor, typed out, "Good riddance to bad baggage. Our home can finally have some peace." Not even a minute later, my father, Harlan, replied with a string of laughing emojis, adding, "It is about time she learns how the real world works. No more free rides in this house." I watched every single notification appear while standing completely alone beside everything I owned in the world. I read the words freeloader, baggage, and free ride over and over until the letters blurred together through the heat and the sheer shock. A suffocating wave of anger tightened my throat, choking off my air. I looked up from my cracked phone screen and stared directly at Sloane. She was now leaning casually against the white porch railing, admiring her fresh, expensive gel manicure. Hanging off her shoulder was a brand new Prada bag. A bag that I knew for a fact cost more than my first car. A bag that, ironically, was paid for by the very freeloader she was publicly mocking to hundreds of people. I did not reply to the post. I did not type out an angry, desperate defense in the comment section. I did not scream across the lawn or ask why the exact same people who had secretly relied on my paycheck, my pristine credit score, and my endless, pathetic silence were suddenly throwing a public party to celebrate my eviction. They were trying to humiliate me. They wanted to break me down so completely that I would come crawling back in a week, begging for their scraps of affection and financial approval. But they were entirely wrong about how this day was going to end. Before I tell you how I tore down their fake kingdom of wealth and lies in a single night, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from, and what is the weather like there right now? I am incredibly curious to see how far this story of family betrayal will travel. Drop your location in the comments right now. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat of the van, slammed the heavy metal trunk shut, and climbed behind the steering wheel. I did not shed a single tear as I put the van in drive and pulled away from the perfectly cut lawns of my parents' street. I drove away in total silence. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. Because inside my worn-out backpack, resting safely on the seat next to me, I was guarding a thick, heavy folder containing 3 stacks of legal documents. Documents that proved without a shadow of a doubt who the real parasites in that house were. By tomorrow morning, their arrogant laughter was going to turn into a desperate nightmare they could never wake up from. But how did it get to this point? How did the quiet, obedient daughter, the one who always kept her head down and did what she was told, turn into the architect of their ultimate downfall. Let me take you back to where the nightmare really began. The neighborhood of Naperville is known for its beautiful homes, excellent schools, and a culture of intense, quiet competition among neighbors. Everything has to look perfect from the outside. My parents, Harlan and Cora, were the king and queen of maintaining appearances. Harlan was the branch manager of a small logistics company, a man who carried himself like a Fortune 500 CEO despite his mediocre salary. He was loud, demanding, and utterly convinced of his own brilliance. Cora was heavily involved in the local homeowners association, constantly policing the neighbors' grass height while ignoring the rotting foundation of her own family. She wore pearls to the grocery store and spoke in a sweet, high-pitched voice that masked a deeply manipulative nature. And then there was Sloan. Sloan was 29 years old, 3 years older than me, and the undisputed golden child of the family. From the moment she could walk, she was given the best of everything. Dance lessons, pageant dresses, a brand new convertible for her sweet 16. She was conventionally beautiful, effortlessly charismatic, and utterly ruthless. She now owned a high-end fashion and event planning boutique downtown, a business that my parents endlessly bragged about at every dinner party. Then there was my older brother, Declan, 24 years old and completely useless. He worked regional sales, constantly drifting between jobs, but in my parents' eyes, he was just finding his passion. And finally, there was me, Maeve, the invisible middle child. I was the corporate internal auditor, the practical one, the boring one. I did not have Sloane's flair for fashion or Declan's charming smile. I had spreadsheets. I had a relentless work ethic because I learned very early on that if I wanted anything in life, I had to pay for it myself. I paid for my own clothes, my own phone bill, and eventually, a massive chunk of the household expenses. But in their eyes, I was never a contributor. I was just a convenient safety net that they despised needing. The resentment they felt towards me was a living, breathing thing in our house. They hated that I was independent, yet they demanded my money to maintain their illusion of wealth. The humiliation in the driveway was just the grand finale of a performance they had been rehearsing for years. To truly understand the sheer cruelty of that Facebook post, to grasp why being called a freeloader was a knife twisted directly into my spine, you have to walk with me through the museum of pain my family built for me over the past decade. It was a museum filled with carefully curated exhibits of emotional neglect and financial abuse. I was not just the invisible child. I was the family scapegoat, the designated punching bag whose only purpose was to absorb their failures and fund their successes. Let me show you Exhibit A. When I was 19 years old, working double shifts at a local diner to pay for my community college textbooks, I woke up with a blinding, agonizing pain in my jaw. It was an impacted wisdom tooth. The pain was so severe I could barely open my mouth to speak. I went to our family dentist, expecting our insurance to cover the emergency extraction. The receptionist, looking at me with deep pity, informed me that my policy had been canceled 3 months prior. I was entirely uninsured. When I drove home, crying from the pain, I confronted my father in the living room. Harlan did not even look up from his newspaper. "Times are tough, Maeve," he grumbled, taking a sip of his coffee. "We had to cut back on unnecessary expenses. You are old enough to figure it out. Just take some painkillers." I paid for the emergency surgery out of my own meager savings, draining my bank account down to $0. Exactly 2 weeks later, I walked into our backyard and found caterers setting up massive white tents. My parents threw a lavish, catered launch party for Sloane's new boutique. There were towering ice sculptures, imported champagne, and a live string quartet. They had sacrificed my basic medical care, left me in agonizing pain, just so they could buy expensive liquor for Sloane's rich friends. Exhibit B was the great family vacation of 2023. They planned a 2-week luxury cruise to the Bahamas. It was pitched as a celebration of my parents' anniversary. I was explicitly told I was not invited because it was meant for couples only. They took Sloane, her wealthy fiancé, Declan, and his girlfriend. While they were packing designer swimsuits and wide-brimmed hats, they handed me a thick stack of envelopes. "We need you to hold down the fort," Cora told me, not making eye contact. "The property taxes are due, and the utility bills are running a bit high this month. Be a good girl and handle it while we are gone." While they were sipping brightly colored cocktails on a private, sun-drenched beach, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at past due notices. I drained my own savings account again, transferring exactly $2,500 to cover their household expenses to prevent the electricity from being shut off. When they returned, sunburned and laughing, they did not bring me a souvenir. They did not even say thank you. And then there was Exhibit C, the most recent and perhaps the most petty display of their contempt. Just a few months ago, Sloane walked into my bedroom without knocking. She rummaged through my closet and took my expensive cashmere coat. It was the one truly nice thing I had bought for myself after receiving a promotion at work. She wore it to a high-profile charity gala. When she finally returned it 3 days later, it was stained with a massive, dark patch of red wine down the front. When I confronted her and quietly demanded she pay for the specialized dry cleaning, Harlan stormed into my room. His face was purple with rage, the veins in his neck bulging. "In this house, if you do not contribute cheerfully, you are just a freeloader," he shouted, pointing a thick, aggressive finger an inch from my nose. "Do not be so petty and jealous of your sister. She is networking for her business, something you know nothing about." I absorbed those hurts. I swallowed the unfairness like bitter medicine because I desperately wanted a family. I wanted to believe that if I just worked harder, if I just gave a little more money, if I was just a little more accommodating, they would eventually love me. But the brutal, naked truth finally shattered my pathetic illusion exactly 3 weeks before the day I moved out. I had applied for a senior risk management position at a massive, prestigious financial firm in downtown Chicago. It was my dream job. The interviews went flawlessly. I nailed every technical question. They practically offered me the job on the spot, pending only a routine background and financial credit check. It was a formality, I thought. My credit was perfect. A week later, I was called into the office of Piper, the HR director. Piper was a kind woman with warm eyes, but that day, she looked at me with deep, uncomfortable pity. She slid a piece of heavy paper across her polished desk. The company was officially rescinding the job offer. When I asked why, my voice trembling, Piper gently folded her hands. "Maeve," she said softly, "we cannot hire someone for a senior risk management role when their personal finances show massive, unexplained liabilities. I strongly suggest you pull a full credit report immediately." I left the building feeling like I was walking underwater. I sat in my car in the parking lot, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I pulled the report, expecting to see a forgotten medical bill or perhaps a clerical error on a student loan payment. Instead, the screen loaded to reveal an absolute horror story. I did not have one unknown account. I had 3. A massive, premium credit card with a rolling balance of $22,000. A commercial business line of credit maxed out at $45,000. And a bizarre, cross-collateralized auto loan for $31,000. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. The total debt hanging around my neck like an anchor was exactly $98,000. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could not breathe. The air in the car felt thick and hot. I looked closer at the meticulous details on the report. All 3 accounts were opened within the last 18 months, using my social security number and leveraging my pristine credit history. The commercial business loan explicitly listed Sloane's Boutique as the primary corporate beneficiary. The credit card statements, which I quickly managed to pull up through the online portal, showed a long, sickening history of purchases. High-end restaurant dinners, designer clothes from luxury retailers, and a massive, recurring payment to the local country club. But the detail that made my blood run ice cold, the detail that killed the last remaining shred of love I had for my family, was not the staggering amount of money. It was the digital footprint. The credit report showed the exact IP address used to originate these online applications. I recognized the network provider immediately. It was the exact internet service we had at my parents' house. And the secondary verification email linked to the accounts for password recovery? It was an old Yahoo address that my mother, Cora, had created for me back when I was in middle school. An account I had not used in a decade, but an account only she knew the security questions and password to. My own family had stolen my identity. They had forged my name. What would you do if the people you trusted most in the world sold your future, your reputation, and your livelihood just for their own shallow comfort? I drove home that evening feeling entirely hollowed out. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The world outside my windshield was a meaningless blur of streetlights and passing cars. The anger had not fully set in yet. I was still completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. When I finally walked through the heavy oak front door of our house, the smell of roasted garlic, expensive imported herbs, and roasting meat hit my face. It was the smell of a comfortable, upper-middle-class Tuesday evening. I walked straight into the kitchen. I found my mother, Cora, humming cheerfully to a jazz track playing on the smart speaker. She was meticulously arranging a vase of fresh, incredibly expensive saffron flowers on the pristine granite island. She looked so perfectly put together in her tailored slacks and silk blouse. She looked so painfully normal. I did not say a word at first. I simply reached into my bag, pulled out the printed credit report, and threw it forcefully onto the island, right over her pristine white linen tablecloth. The thick stack of papers scattered, knocking against the expensive crystal vase. Cora stopped humming instantly. She looked down at the papers, her perfectly manicured hands hovering in the air. She did not gasp. She did not bring her hands to her mouth in shock. She did not look horrified. Instead, she just let out a long, heavy, dramatic sigh, like I was a toddler who had tracked mud onto the carpet. She casually picked up one of the pages. "What is this supposed to be, Maeve?" she asked, her voice dripping with a sickeningly fake innocence. "You tell me," I said. My voice was dangerously low, trembling with a primal rage I was struggling to keep contained behind my teeth. $98,000, Mom. Commercial business loans for Sloan. Premium credit cards. You used my social security number. You forged my signature. You stole my identity." Cora rolled her eyes, placed the paper back down on the granite, and calmly went back to arranging her flowers. "Oh, for heaven's sake, stop being so theatrical," she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Families borrow from each other all the time. We are a unit. We needed a little buffer to help Sloan expand the boutique's fall inventory, and your father had a bad quarter at the logistics firm. You have great credit. We are paying the minimums on time. We protected you from the stress of the paperwork. You should be thanking us for keeping this family afloat instead of throwing a tantrum." I stared at her, feeling physically nauseous. The sheer audacity of her words made the room spin. "Thanking you?" I whispered, my voice finally cracking. "You ruined my background check. I lost a massive, life-changing job opportunity today because to the rest of the world, I look like a massive financial risk. I look like a fraud." Before Cora could offer another absurd excuse, Harlan marched into the kitchen, drawn from the living room by the sound of my raised voice. When he saw the scattered credit report on the counter, his jaw tightened instantly. He knew exactly what it was. But instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a sliver of remorse, he puffed out his chest and went on the offensive. "Listen to me," he barked, stepping aggressively into my personal space, towering over me. "As long as you live under this roof, eating our food, using our electricity, and sleeping in our house, you do not question how we manage the finances. We raised you. We paid for you. If you do not like how things operate around here, pack your bags and get out. But do not you dare call your mother a thief in her own kitchen." I retreated to my bedroom that night and locked the door. My mind was spinning out of control. I realized then, with crystal clarity, that I was not a human being to them. I was not a daughter. I was a resource. A human credit file they could mine for cash whenever they wanted a new luxury item. But despite the fury burning inside me, I still hesitated to blow up my family. I spent the next 2 days clinging to the pathetic, desperate hope that maybe they would realize what they had done and pay it off. Then came the climax. The final, unforgivable action that severed my ties to them forever and forced my hand. 3 days after the kitchen confrontation, I was backing my modest, reliable Honda Civic out of the driveway to head to my current, lower-paying job. I had my window rolled down, the morning air crisp. Suddenly, a heavy, diesel tow truck aggressively backed up, completely blocking the end of our driveway. A large man in a high-visibility vest stepped out of the cab, checked a clipboard, and walked straight toward my car. Within minutes, he knocked on my window and bluntly informed me that the car was being repossessed. I was frantic. I jumped out of the car, my heart pounding. "There is a mistake," I pleaded. "I have never missed a car payment in my life. I own this car." The man sighed, pulling out a thick stack of paperwork. He showed me the highlighted sections. My parents had secretly used the title of my car, which they had co-signed when I was barely 18 years old, as cross-collateral for another small, high-interest personal loan they had defaulted on. They let my car get repossessed to save themselves from a collection agency. I stood on the manicured front lawn, completely humiliated, watching as the tow truck driver hooked chains to the frame of my car. Several neighbors peeked through their expensive wooden blinds, watching the drama unfold. Harlan came rushing outside, still in his bathrobe. He saw the tow truck, grabbed my arm tightly, and pulled me forcefully back toward the front door. "Do not make a scene out here," he hissed, his grip hurting my arm. "Do not you dare call the police or cause a fuss. Sloan is hosting a major charity luncheon for the country club down the street in an hour, and you will ruin her reputation if there are cops on our lawn. Just let them take the stupid car. I will buy you a used one next month when my bonus comes in." He cared more about Sloan's fake charity event and the opinions of the neighbors than the fact that I was left stranded, carless, and financially ruined. That was the exact moment it happened. The final, frayed string of my patience snapped violently. The sad, lonely, desperate girl who just wanted her family to love her died right there on the front lawn. And in her place, the auditor woke up. Cold, calculating, and absolutely ruthless. If you are watching this and you can feel your blood boiling right along with mine, hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Trust me, the anger you are feeling right now is going to be heavily rewarded very soon. I did not argue with Harlan. I did not shed a tear. I simply nodded, pulled my arm out of his grasp, went inside, and started packing my bags in total silence. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly securing a new apartment within walking distance of my office. They thought my silence was submission. They thought the freeloader was just sulking and accepting her place. They had no idea I was quietly, methodically preparing a financial guillotine. The moment I unlocked the door to my new, empty apartment, I dropped the heavy, torn cardboard box onto the hardwood floor. The sun had finally set, casting long, dark shadows across the bare white walls. The air was thick and still. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. I didn't care about unpacking clothes or setting up the kitchen. I walked straight to the kitchen counter, opened my laptop, plugged it into the wall outlet, and pulled out the thick, heavy folder I had guarded with my life. The image of Sloane's smug, arrogant face leaning against the porch railing flashed in my mind. The memory of those 160 likes ticking upward. My mother's cruel words about bad baggage. It all fueled a cold, burning energy inside me. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I dialed the only person in our entire extended family who was not infected by my parents' toxic obsession with status. My Aunt Delphine. She was my mother's younger sister, but they couldn't have been more different. Delphine was a sharp, no-nonsense woman and a former compliance officer at a major regional bank. For years, she had been labeled the black sheep of the family simply because she refused to fund my parents' lavish lifestyle and called them out on their lies. Delphine answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert. "Hello? Aunt Delphine, it is Maeve," I said. My voice was steady, completely devoid of emotion. I did not cry. I just laid out the facts. I told her about the $98,000. I listed the credit cards, the commercial loan for the boutique, the forged signatures, the IP addresses, and the repossession of my car. Finally, I told her about the Facebook post. "The freeloader is out." There was a long, heavy, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, slow and controlled. "Maeve, Delphine finally said, her voice vibrating with a mixture of profound grief and fierce, terrifying anger. You are not crazy. You are not a freeloader. They have robbed you blind to fund a fantasy. They have committed multiple federal felonies. Do exactly as I say. Get a pen. I am going to help you load the ammunition. For the next 12 hours, wrapped in the darkness of my empty apartment, I operated like a machine. Emotions were useless now. I needed absolute precision. Guided by Delphine's extensive banking expertise, I opened multiple tabs on my browser. I logged onto the Federal Identity Theft Portal and filed a comprehensive, detailed FTC report. I attached every single IP log, the fake Yahoo email address, the forged signatures, and complete copies of the fraudulent applications. I then contacted all 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and placed a hard, unbreakable freeze on my social security number. No one could borrow a single dime in my name ever again. Next, I drafted individual, formal letters of dispute to the credit card company, the commercial lender, and the auto finance company. I explicitly stated that the accounts were opened fraudulently by family members without my consent or knowledge. I attached my new address, my real email, and the official FTC report number. But I did not stop there. The commercial loan tied to Sloan's boutique was their most vulnerable asset. I drafted a specific, highly detailed email to the fraud investigation department of that specific lender, flagging the business line of credit for immediate review due to suspected identity theft and wire fraud. I knew for a fact that Sloan was relying heavily on that exact credit line to purchase her massive fall inventory order the very next day. I set my email client to schedule all of these messages to send automatically. At exactly 5:30 in the morning, while my parents and sister were sound asleep in their stolen luxury, the digital bombs would drop simultaneously into the inboxes of investigators, lenders, and bank compliance officers across the state. I did not send a single text to my family. I did not demand a private apology. I did not threaten them. I simply built an impenetrable wall of irrefutable evidence and handed the keys to the federal authorities. At 5:29 in the morning, I took the last sip of my cold, stale coffee. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon outside my window, painting the sky a bruised purple. At 5:30, the screen on my laptop refreshed automatically. The outbox emptied. The game had officially begun. Part 5, The Wolf Pack's Morning of Terror Target. 1,200 words. I closed the laptop and walked into the bathroom. I took a long, incredibly hot shower, standing under the spray until the water ran cold, washing the dirt, the sweat, and the weakness of my old life down the drain. When I stepped out and wrapped myself in a towel, the bathroom mirror was fogged over. I wiped a circle clear and finally looked at my phone sitting on the sink. The screen was an absolute, chaotic battlefield of notifications. The lenders had moved infinitely faster than I had ever anticipated. The digital bombs had detonated with devastating accuracy. It started exactly at 6 in the morning. Harlan had sent 18 frantic, rapid-fire text messages. Maeve, what the hell did you do? Why is the commercial bank calling me about fraud? Call me right now, this is not a joke. You're destroying your sister's business. Answer the damn phone. At 7 in the morning, my brother Declan jumped into the fray. 35 missed calls in the span of just 40 minutes. Declan was supposed to close on his new house that very week. What he did not know, and what I had just exposed to the bank's fraud department, was that Harlan had secretly funneled part of my fraudulent credit card cash into Declan's bank account to help him show a larger down payment for the mortgage. The moment my federal fraud report hit the system, the bank flagged Declan's entire account for suspicious, potentially laundered funds. His mortgage approval was instantly halted, his closing canceled indefinitely. Then, at exactly 8 in the morning, a voice memo arrived from Cora. I hit play, leaning against the cold bathroom sink. The arrogant, dismissive, eye-rolling mother from the kitchen was completely gone. Her voice was shrill, desperate, and breaking into ugly, heavy sobs. Maeve, please, she cried heavily into the microphone, her breath hitching. The commercial lender just locked Sloan out of her entire warehouse purchasing account. She has a massive shipment arriving today and she cannot pay for it. The vendors are threatening to sue her and seize the inventory. Please, Maeve, I am begging you. Just call the banks and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized it and forgot. Please, we will lose everything. I stared at my reflection in the mirror while her sobs played out. We will lose everything. Notice the wording. Not I am sorry I stole your identity. Not I am sorry I called you a freeloader. Not I am sorry I ruined your job prospects. Just raw, selfish panic because their endless, silent ATM machine had suddenly grown teeth and bitten back hard. I did not reply to the voice memo. I did not text them back. I dried my hair, carefully applied my makeup, put on my sharpest, most expensive corporate suit, and walked out the door. The phone kept ringing, buzzing violently in my purse like a trapped hornet, but I ignored it completely. I drove straight into the city, navigating the morning traffic with a calm I had never felt before, heading toward a tall, glass-paneled office building downtown. Delphine had called in a massive favor and arranged an emergency morning meeting for me with Beckett, a high-profile attorney specializing entirely in white-collar crime and financial fraud. I walked into Beckett's plush office, carrying my heavy folder of evidence like a shield. The receptionist looked at my constantly ringing phone with deep concern, but I just smiled calmly at her. Let them panic. Let them feel a fraction of the anxiety I felt when my car was dragged away. I sat down in a heavy leather chair across from Beckett, a sharp-eyed man in his late 50s wearing a bespoke suit, who looked at my documents with predatory, calculated interest. The things he was about to discover in those papers would push this from a messy family dispute into a full-blown criminal enterprise. Beckett took my folder and meticulously spread the documents across his massive mahogany desk. He spent the next 45 minutes in near total silence. He traced the signatures with a silver pen, matched the dates on the applications to my work schedule, and cross-referenced the IP addresses using his computer. The only sound in the room was the heavy ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. They were incredibly sloppy, Beckett finally said, looking up over the rim of his glasses. The arrogance here is staggering. But they were also dangerously coordinated. Look at this signature on the commercial loan agreement for the boutique. He turned the heavy parchment paper around and slid it toward me. It was my name, Maeve, but the handwriting was a shaky, overly looped imitation. I had seen it before on the digital copies, but seeing it in high resolution on the original fax copy made my stomach turn. But Beckett did not point to the signature. He pointed to a small, raised stamp at the bottom of the page. It was a notary seal. To get a commercial loan of this size approved without you physically present in the bank, they needed the documents legally notarized, Beckett explained smoothly. This seal belongs to a licensed notary named Astrid. My breath hitched in my throat. Astrid. She was Cora's best friend. The woman who practically lived at our house on weekends, drinking expensive wine and gossiping on our patio. She was part of the chorus of relatives who had happily liked Sloane's cruel Facebook post about the freeloader. She was a state-licensed notary, and she had intentionally stamped a forged legal document, fully knowing I was not in the room. This was not just my parents being desperate and making a bad choice. This was a coordinated, systematic betrayal involving their friends. Before I could even process the shock of Astrid's involvement, my phone vibrated with a call from Aunt Delphine. I asked Beckett for permission, and he nodded, allowing me to put her on speakerphone. Maeve, Delphine's voice crackled through the speaker. She was breathless, vibrating with a rage I had never, ever heard from her before. I just spent the entire morning calling in some serious favors from my old contacts at the Regional Trust Department. I need you to sit down and brace yourself. This is so much worse than credit cards and business loans. I gripped the cold leather arms of the chair. What is it, Delphine? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Your grandmother, my mother, set up a trust fund for you before she passed away. You were supposed to gain full, unrestricted access to it when you turned 21. Harlan and Cora told you it was depleted to pay for your college tuition, right? Yes, I answered, my throat incredibly tight. I worked 2 jobs in college because they said the trust ran out after my freshman year. They showed me 0 balance statements. It was a lie, Delphine spat, the venom clear in her voice. The trust did not run out. The day before your 21st birthday, Harlan used a forged medical power of attorney document claiming you were mentally incapacitated to liquidate the remaining assets. He drained it entirely, Maeve. $185,000. The room started to spin violently. $185,000. That was life-changing money. That was a house. That was total freedom. Where did it go? I asked, though a sickening, horrifying realization was already forming deep in my gut. Delphine sighed heavily, a sound of pure disgust. It was wired directly to a commercial real estate holding company. The exact company that owns the retail space where Sloane's boutique is located. They did not just rent that space for her, Maeve. They bought it outright with your money. And they put the deed in Sloane's name. The silence in Beckett's office was deafening. The irony was so incredibly sharp it physically hurt my chest. Sloane, the golden child. Sloane, the self-made businesswoman who constantly bragged on Instagram about her hustle, her grind, and her independent success. She was standing in a building bought with my stolen inheritance, running a business funded by my stolen credit, and she had the absolute audacity to post a picture of me sweating in the driveway, calling me a freeloader. Every single brick of her fake, glamorous empire was cemented with my blood and my future. Before we move on to the explosive confrontation where I tear their empire down to the studs, I want to ask you a favor. If you have watched this far and you are rooting for me to crush them, drop the phrase "I'm win" in the comments below. It is our secret code for the true supporters who made it through the backstory. I will be hearting and replying to every single comment that says "I'm win." Beckett leaned back in his heavy chair, folding his hands together in his lap. He looked at me not with pity, but with deep, professional respect. "Well, Maeve," he said quietly, his voice dangerously calm. "You have two choices right now. We can send a gentle cease and desist letter, try to settle this quietly out of court, and get them to slowly pay you back over the next 20 years. Or we can drop a legal anvil on their heads. We can freeze the boutique's assets by noon, report the notary to the state licensing board for felony fraud, and file a civil suit that will force them to liquidate everything they own to pay you back today." I looked down at my phone. I opened the browser. Sloane's post was still up. "The freeloader is out. 160 likes. I looked back up at Beckett, felt a cold, hard smile form on my face, and took a deep breath. "Let us drop the anvil," I said. "I want them to feel the crushing weight of every single dollar they stole." The meeting was set for Friday evening at a high-end Italian restaurant called Antonio's, located right in the heart of downtown. I deliberately chose this location. It was constantly crowded, the tables were placed closely together, and the clientele consisted mostly of wealthy professionals who valued quiet, polite behavior. It was the exact type of public environment where my parents would be terrified to cause a scene or raise their voices. They cared too much about their public image to scream in a room full of people wearing Rolex watches and tailored suits. I arrived 45 minutes early. I wore my sharpest charcoal blazer, my hair pulled back tightly. I wanted to look like the auditor I was, not the daughter they could easily manipulate. I requested a large booth in the center of the main dining room. The waiter brought me a glass of sparkling water, and I meticulously placed 4 thick, blood-red envelopes on the white linen tablecloth. One for Harlan, one for Cora, one for Sloane, and one for Declan. Each envelope was explicitly labeled with their name in bold black ink. Aunt Delphine arrived shortly after I did, but she did not sit with me. As we had planned, she took a seat at the polished mahogany bar on the other side of the room, ordering a glass of Pinot Noir. From her vantage point, she had a clear, unobstructed view of our booth, but she remained entirely out of sight from the entrance. She was my silent witness, my backup, and the keeper of the final, devastating piece of evidence. At exactly 7 o'clock, they walked through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant. They looked like a walking advertisement for upper-middle-class perfection. Sloane was draped in a stunning silk dress, her diamond earrings catching the dim chandelier light. She walked with that same arrogant, untouchable swagger she had on the porch. Cora wore her signature pearls, her hair perfectly blown out. Harlan strutted slightly ahead of them, his chest puffed out, scanning the room as if he owned the entire building. Declan trailed behind, constantly checking his phone, looking annoyed to even be there. When they spotted me, Harlan's fake smile dropped. He marched over to the booth, not bothering to take off his expensive wool coat. He slid into the seat directly across from me. Cora sat next to him, her eyes immediately darting to the 4 red envelopes. Sloane sat on the outer edge, crossing her arms defensively. Declan took a chair pulled up to the side of the table. "What is this theatrical nonsense, Maeve?" Harlan hissed, keeping his voice low but lacing it with pure venom. He leaned over the table, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "We have been trying to call you for 3 days. Your mother has been sick with worry, and you drag us to a restaurant? I am not playing these childish games. You are going to lift those ridiculous credit freezes tonight, or you are cut out of this family forever." I did not flinch. I did not shrink back into the booth like I used to. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, placed the glass down, and looked him dead in the eyes. "I am not here to negotiate with you, Harlan," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I did not call you Dad. I used his first name." I saw the muscle in his jaw twitch furiously at the disrespect. "I am here to give you one single opportunity to understand exactly what is about to happen to your lives." I reached out and slid the first envelope across the table toward him. Then I slid Cora's, Sloane's, and Declan's. "Open them," I commanded. Cora's hands were shaking as she reached for hers. Harlan glared at me but snatched his envelope off the table. Declan just looked confused. Sloane, however, let out a loud, dramatic scoff. She picked up the red envelope with 2 manicured fingers, her face twisting in disgust. "I am not reading your pathetic little grievances, Maeve," Sloane sneered, her voice carrying just enough for the next table to glance over. "You have always been insanely jealous of me, and now you are trying to ruin my business because you are bitter you had to move into some cheap, tiny apartment. You are a spiteful little freeloader, and I am done humoring you." She gripped the edge of the envelope, fully intending to rip it in half and throw the pieces in my face. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Go ahead and tear it, Sloane," I whispered smoothly. "But before you do, you should know that inside that envelope is a copy of the felony fraud report I filed with the federal government. It contains the exact IP address your mother used to forge my signature on your $45,000 commercial loan. It also contains the sworn statement from the Notary Licensing Board investigating your mother's friend, Astrid." Sloane froze. Her fingers stopped moving. The arrogant smirk on her face dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The color drained from her cheeks so fast she looked physically ill. She did not tear the envelope. Her hands trembling violently, she fumbled with the seal, ripped it open, and pulled out the thick stack of printed papers. When her eyes fell upon the first page, the official federal seal of the investigation, her breath hitched audibly. The mocking laughter was dead. The silence at the table was suffocating. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware from the surrounding diners and the frantic rustling of paper as my family frantically dug through their respective envelopes. Declan was the first to speak. His face was pale, his eyes darting frantically across a bank statement. "Maeve," he stammered, holding up a highlighted page. "What is this? Why do you have my checking account statements?" I turned my gaze to him. "Because, Declan, that highlights the $12,000 Harlan wired to your account last month for your house down payment. The money you happily accepted. Do you know where that money came from? It came directly from a cash advance on a premium credit card opened in my name. You used stolen funds to buy your house. The mortgage company knows. That is why your closing was halted." Declan looked at Harlan, panic radiating from his eyes. "Dad, you told me that was from your end-of-year bonus. You told me it was clean money." Harlan ignored him. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He threw the papers down on the table, leaned forward, and pointed a thick finger at me. "You ungrateful little brat," he snarled, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "We gave you everything. We put a roof over your head. We fed you. Families do what they have to do to survive, and you are going to send your own mother to prison over some paperwork?" Cora immediately started to cry. Real, heavy tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Maeve, please, she sobbed, reaching across the table to grab my hand. I pulled my hand away quickly. We never meant to hurt you. Sloane just needed a boost, and you were always so good with money. You never complained. We thought you would understand. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick, meticulously bound Excel spreadsheet. I dropped it heavily onto the center of the table. Understand? I echoed, my voice rising just a fraction, cutting through her fake sobbing. Let us talk about understanding. This spreadsheet contains every single grocery receipt, every utility transfer, every property tax payment, and every emergency repair bill I have paid for this family over the last 3 years. I tapped the bottom of the page with my fingernail. The total is $51,000. I handed you $51,000 of my own hard-earned salary to keep the lights on while you went on luxury cruises and bought Prada bags. And how did you repay me? By stealing $98,000 more and calling me a freeloader on the internet. Sloane, still staring at her federal fraud report, suddenly slammed her hands on the table. You owe us. She hissed, her voice shrill and desperate. I am your sister. I am trying to build an empire and you are just a desk worker. You have no idea the pressure I am under to succeed. You were supposed to support me. That was the cue. From across the restaurant, Delphine slid off her bar stool. She walked calmly and purposefully toward our table, carrying a plain manila folder. My parents did not notice her until she was standing directly behind Harlan's shoulder. When Cora looked up and saw her sister, she gasped. Delphine? What are you doing here? Delphine did not look at Cora. She looked at Harlan with a level of disgust usually reserved for insects. She dropped the manila folder right on top of my spreadsheet. I am here to deliver the final exhibit, Delphine said, her voice echoing with authority. Go ahead, Harlan. Explain to your children where the trust fund went. Harlan's face went from purple to a sickly, ashen gray. He looked at the manila folder as if it were a live bomb. He could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Declan, desperate for answers, grabbed the folder and flipped it open. What trust fund? He asked. Maeve's college money ran out years ago. It never ran out, Declan, I said softly, watching the devastation wash over my family. Grandma left me $185,000. Harlan forged a medical power of attorney, claiming I was mentally unfit and drained every single penny the day before my 21st birthday. Sloane looked at me, confusion mixing with her terror. So what? He stole your college money. What does that have to do with me? I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of an executioner pulling the lever. Look at the wire transfer receipt in that folder, Sloane, I instructed her. Look at the holding company it went to. Sloane snatched the paper from Declan. She read the name of the holding company. Then she read the address of the commercial property that had been purchased with the stolen funds. It was the exact address of her boutique. He didn't just steal my money, Sloane, I said, leaning in so she could hear every syllable clearly. He used my $185,000 to buy the retail space you operate out of. He put the deed in your name. You're standing in my building. You are running a business funded by my credit. You are not a self-made empire, Sloane. You are nothing but a parasite feeding off my blood. Sloane dropped the paper. She covered her mouth, her eyes wide with undeniable shock. For the first time in her life, the illusion of her superiority was shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. And by the way, I added, checking my watch casually, you might want to check your email. Because right now, federal customs agents are seizing your massive fall inventory shipment at the port. The lender canceled your letter of credit 3 hours ago. Sloane let out a choked, guttural sob. You would think that being confronted with irrefutable, undeniable evidence of massive financial crimes would make a person surrender. You would think that seeing the sheer scale of the devastation they caused would force Harlan and Cora to finally fall on their knees and beg for mercy. But desperate, arrogant people do not surrender when cornered. They lash out. They try to bite. The meeting at Antonio's ended with Harlan grabbing Cora by the arm and dragging her out of the restaurant, leaving Sloane weeping uncontrollably in the booth and Declan staring blankly at the wall. I walked out with Delphine, feeling a massive weight lifted from my chest, believing the worst was over. I was wrong. 3 days later, the cowardly counterattack began. I was sitting at my desk at the accounting firm, reviewing a quarterly audit, when the receptionist called my extension. Her voice was unusually tight. "Maeve, there are 2 uniformed police officers here to see you." My stomach plummeted. I walked out to the lobby, my heart pounding against my ribs. The officers were polite but firm. They handed me a thick stack of legal papers. It was an emergency restraining order. I read through the documents, my vision blurring with rage. Harlan had gone to a county judge and filed a sworn affidavit claiming that I had violently threatened him and Cora at the restaurant. He claimed I was mentally unstable, deeply disturbed, and attempting to extort them for money using fabricated documents. The judge, seeing a terrified father pleading for protection from an allegedly unhinged daughter, granted a temporary order. I was legally barred from contacting them, coming within 500 feet of their house, or reaching out to any of their associates. It was a brilliant, evil tactical move. By painting me as an extortionist and a physical threat, Harlan was trying to discredit my fraud claims before the police could fully investigate the identity theft. If I looked like a crazy, vindictive daughter, the banks might just write off my disputes as a messy family drama. But Harlan was not the only one attacking. Later that afternoon, Piper, the HR director at the firm that had rescinded my job offer, called me. She sounded deeply apologetic but highly concerned. "Maeve," Piper said gently, "a woman named Astrid called our corporate ethics hotline today. She identified herself as your aunt. She claimed that the reason your credit is ruined is because you have a severe gambling addiction and that you have been caught stealing petty cash from your current employer. She warned us not to hire you." Astrid, the notary, the woman who forged the stamp on my commercial loan. Cora had sent her flying monkeys to actively destroy my professional reputation so I would be entirely defenseless. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to drag me through the mud. So I called Beckett. When I sat in Beckett's office and showed him the restraining order and told him about Astrid's phone call, he did not look worried. In fact, he smiled. It was a terrifying, shark-like smile. "Maeve," Beckett said, steepling his fingers. "When your opponent is digging a hole, you do not take away their shovel. You hand them an excavator. Harlan just handed us the keys to his prison cell." Beckett moved with terrifying speed. He immediately subpoenaed the security footage from Antonio's restaurant. The high-definition cameras clearly showed our entire interaction. It showed me sitting calmly, drinking sparkling water. It showed Harlan leaning over the table aggressively, pointing his finger in my face. It showed no threats, no violence, and certainly no extortion on my part. Next, Beckett drafted a devastating legal motion to dissolve the restraining order, attaching the video footage and my federal fraud reports. But he didn't stop there. By filing a demonstrably false affidavit under oath to secure the restraining order, Harlan had just committed felony perjury. Beckett forwarded the evidence directly to the district attorney's office. As for Astrid, Beckett hired a private investigator who pulled the phone records. He proved the call to the HR department came directly from Astrid's real estate office. Beckett drafted a massive civil suit against Astrid for defamation, tortious interference with business relations, and professional malpractice regarding the forged notary seal. He sent a copy of the drafted lawsuit to her office via certified mail, along with a letter to the state notary board. The counterattack did not last a week. The bomb Harlan and Cora tried to plant under my life blew up spectacularly in their own faces. The speed at which their ivory tower crumbled was breathtaking. Once the federal authorities, the banks, and the lawyers started pulling on the threads of their lies, the entire sweater unraveled in a matter of days. Karma did not just knock on their front door, it drove a wrecking ball through their living room. It started with Sloane. The golden child's perfect life shattered first. Her wealthy fiancé, the son of a prominent venture capitalist, noticed she was hyperventilating over legal documents and crying hysterically for days. Suspicious, he asked his father's firm to run a quiet, private background check on her boutique's finances. When he discovered that his beautiful, successful fiancée was heavily implicated in a massive identity theft ring against her own sister, and that her prized boutique was built on stolen trust fund money, he did not hesitate. He canceled the lavish country club wedding immediately. He demanded his $50,000 engagement ring back. Worse yet, his father's firm had been quietly preparing to inject a massive amount of capital into Sloane's business. They pulled the funding entirely. Without the stolen credit lines, and without the investor capital, Sloane could not pay her vendors. The boutique was shuttered, and a bright orange foreclosure notice was pasted to the front door of the building my trust fund had bought. Declan was next. His fiancée, a sweet girl who worked as a kindergarten teacher, found out about the halted mortgage and the source of the down payment. Disgusted that she was about to buy a house with stolen money, she packed her bags, left the apartment they shared, and moved back in with her parents. Declan was left entirely alone, facing severe questioning from the bank regarding his involvement in receiving fraudulent funds. But the hardest falls belonged to Harlan and Cora. The logistics company Harlan worked for was incredibly strict about corporate ethics. When the district attorney officially charged Harlan with felony perjury for the fake restraining order, and the police showed up at his office to question him about wire fraud, the CEO had him escorted out of the building by security. He was suspended indefinitely without pay, his reputation in the industry instantly pulverized. Cora's punishment was far more social, which, for her, was worse than death. The private investigator Beckett hired had interviewed several neighbors to establish a timeline of when my car was repossessed. The gossip spread through the wealthy subdivision like a wildfire. The women in the homeowners association, women Cora had sneered at and judged for years, finally had their ammunition. They called an emergency board meeting and publicly voted to remove Cora from her position as president, citing severe moral turpitude and financial instability. 2 weeks after the disaster at the restaurant, a process server walked up to their perfectly manicured lawn and handed Harlan a thick stack of papers. It was the formal civil lawsuit filed by Beckett. I was suing them for the stolen $98,000, the stolen $185,000 trust fund, massive punitive damages, and all attorney fees. The stress took an immediate, brutal physical toll on them. When I finally saw them again, they looked like hollowed-out shells. Their skin was pale, their hands shook, and the arrogant fire in their eyes had been entirely extinguished. They had lost the jobs, the businesses, the weddings, and the social standing. But despite all of this, there was still one massive debt of honor left to pay. The money was not enough. They had publicly branded me a freeloader, and I demanded a public execution of that lie. The final mediation took place in the grand conference room of Beckett's law firm. It was a stark, intimidating room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, wearing a tailored suit, sipping hot black tea. Delphine sat to my right. Beckett sat to my left, his legal paths perfectly aligned. When my family walked in, accompanied by a cheap, overwhelmed defense attorney they had scrambled to hire, the shift in power was palpable. Harlan looked 10 years older, his shoulders slumped, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. Cora wore no makeup, her eyes red and heavily swollen from endless crying. Sloane wore a simple, unbranded sweater, staring firmly at the floor. They did not sit down immediately. They stood on the opposite side of the table, waiting for permission. I let them stand for a full minute before I gestured to the chairs. Their lawyer started with a pathetic, groveling speech about family unity, forgiveness, and finding a way to settle this without sending anyone to federal prison. He offered a payment plan. $2,000 a month for the next 30 years. Beckett laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound. My client is not a bank offering a mortgage, counselor. My client is the victim of a coordinated criminal conspiracy. We are not doing payment plans. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the polished wood. Here are my terms, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room. You stole a combined total of $283,000 from me. Factoring in Beckett's fees and the damages for my ruined job offer, you owe me roughly $350,000. Harlan rubbed his face with trembling hands. Maeve, we do not have that kind of liquid cash. You know we don't. Sloane's business is dead. I have no income. We are ruined. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity. No remorse. I know you don't have the cash, Harlan. But you have assets. I slid a legally binding settlement agreement across the table. In exchange for me dropping the civil suit and officially requesting the district attorney to offer a plea deal that avoids prison time for the fraud, you will sign this document today. Cora picked up the document with shaking hands. She read the first page and gasped, dropping it as if it burned her. You cannot be serious, she whispered. Clause 1, I stated clearly. You will immediately list the house in Naperville for sale. The exact house you kicked me out of. The house you prioritized over my well-being. All equity from the sale, up to $350,000, will be transferred directly to a secured escrow account controlled by Beckett. You will downsize. You will move into an apartment you can actually afford. Harlan looked like he was going to vomit. That house is everything we have built. It is our home. It was my home too, I replied, my voice like ice. Until you threw me out on the driveway and laughed while my car was towed. I turned my attention to Sloan, who was silently weeping. Clause 2 is for you, Sloan. The money makes me financially whole. But you destroyed my character. You posted a picture of me to 160 relatives, calling me a freeloader. You let them mock me. Sloan looked up, tears streaming down her face. I am sorry, Maeve. I was insecure. I was so jealous of how smart you were, of how you never needed their help. I just wanted to feel superior. I will delete the post. I promise. Deleting it is not enough, I said. I handed her a single sheet of paper. Beckett drafted a statement. You will log into your Facebook account right now, in this room. You will post this exact statement. You will tag every single one of those 160 relatives. And you will leave it pinned to the top of your profile for 30 consecutive days. If you take it down early, the settlement is void and you go to trial. Sloan read the paper, her face turning crimson with pure humiliation. Cora stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Maeve, please. She begged, clasping her hands together. Take the house. Take the money. But please don't make her post this. Don't humiliate us in front of the whole family. They will never look at us the same way again. We will be outcasts. Please, do not do this to us. I looked at my mother, watching her beg to save her precious social image while willingly surrendering her home. It proved everything I ever needed to know about her priorities. I stood up, buttoned my blazer, and looked down at her. You relied on the crowd to humiliate me, Cora, I said firmly. You used the audience to try and break me. Now, the audience gets to know the truth. Sign the papers and make the post, or we go to court on Monday and you can explain it to a judge. They signed. Their hands shook, tears stained the expensive legal paper, but they signed every single line. Right there in the conference room, Sloan pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled so badly she dropped it once. She opened Facebook, attached the exact same photo of me carrying the box down the driveway, and typed out the statement Beckett had written. I called my sister a freeloader. That was a lie. For the last 3 years, Maeve paid over $50,000 to keep our family afloat. Meanwhile, my parents and I stole her identity, ruined her credit, and secretly drained her $185,000 trust fund to buy the building for my boutique. Maeve is not a parasite. We are. We stole from her, we lied to her, and we are deeply, profoundly sorry for the criminal and emotional damage we have caused. She hit post. I watched it go live. The fallout was spectacular. Within an hour, the post had double the engagement of the original insult. My phone started blowing up with text messages and voicemails from the exact same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had laughed at me days prior. They were horrified. They groveled, they apologized, they claimed they always knew something was wrong with Harlan and Cora. I did not reply to a single one of them. I blocked every single number. Their approval meant nothing to me when I was down, and their apologies meant nothing to me now that I had one. 3 months later, the house in Naperville sold. The equity easily covered the $350,000 they owed me. The money was wired directly into a secure account only I could access. Armed with the federal fraud reports and Beckett's aggressive legal letters, the credit bureaus expunged the fraudulent accounts from my history. My pristine credit score was fully restored. The accounting firm that had rescinded my offer called me back. Piper, the HR director, personally apologized for the ordeal. Not only did they reinstate the job offer, but they also increased the starting salary by 15% to compensate for the trouble. I used a portion of the recovered trust fund to put a massive down payment on a beautiful, sunlit condominium in a quiet neighborhood overlooking the lake. I furnished it exactly how I wanted. It was peaceful. It was safe. It was entirely mine. As for my family, they moved into a cramped, cheap rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. Harlan works as a night shift dispatcher for a trucking company. Cora works the cash register at a local pharmacy. Sloane, having lost her business, her fiancé, and her reputation, now works as an assistant manager at a chain retail store in the mall. We have not spoken a single word to each other since the day they signed the papers in Beckett's office. But yesterday, Aunt Delphine called me. She comes over for coffee every Sunday now. She sat on my new velvet couch, looking deeply conflicted. "Maeve," she said softly, "I heard from a cousin. Cora is very sick. It is a severe heart condition. She is in the hospital, and she has been crying for you. She told the nurses she just wants you to unblock her email so she can send you one final apology before she goes into surgery. She says she cannot find peace until you hear her out." I sat in my beautiful, quiet living room, looking out at the calm water of the lake. I thought about the days I spent starving myself to pay their electric bill. I thought about the sheer terror of watching my car get towed. I thought about the calculated, evil way they laughed at me on the driveway. I looked at Delphine, took a sip of my coffee, and said, "Tell the cousin I wish Cora a successful surgery." But my email stays blocked. Peace is a luxury she cannot afford to buy for me anymore. I did not destroy my family. I simply stopped protecting a system that was designed to destroy me. Sometimes, the strongest, most powerful answer you can give to the people who broke you is to refuse to carry their consequences for them. So, I turn to you, the audience, the jury of this story. Gonde, di Delphine noi mi toi dang om nong va muon toi emo qua email de ne ba noi loi exine loi koi kung. Toi de tu choi. Kak bangisa? Toi ko qua ton nan kong. Hey toi ko gwen bao vi su ben yen ma toi de fi tra jia bang ma va nuok mat moi ko duok. Hey cho toi bi y kien qua ban dui fan ben luan ne. Thank you so much for watching my story. If you found yourself nodding along, if you have ever had to set a hard boundary to protect your own sanity, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss another true story of survival and payback. See you in the next one.